welcome to the 22nd monthly meeting of the UK MTB Trail Alliance. In a moment, I'll hand over to Edinburgh Napier University's Dr. Lesley Ingram-Sills. She'll talk us through research looking at the current demographics of the UK's e-bike riders and how e-bikes are changing our riding habits. We'll then move to an open discussion about how we're all experiencing these changes locally, what we can do to ensure the growth in e-bike usage is socially and environmentally sustainable, and what we can do to exploit the potential of e-bikes to open up mountain biking to underrepresented groups. So having said that, over to you, Lesley.
Thanks, Robin. Hi, everyone. So thank you very much for the invite to come to present today. I'm going to talk a little bit around some of the research we've been looking at into e-bikes and what we're sort of seeing in the trail and how that's changing. I'm going to present a few little different bits of data today, but I'll get onto that in a few more slides' time. I thought, first of all, I'll just introduce myself a little bit. So I'm an academic at Edinburgh Napier University. I feel very fortunate that I've managed to forge my research career into the sport that I love, which is mountain biking. I'm actually a sports scientist to trade, so I spent a lot of time working with elite downhillers. I've trained Mark Beaumont for his round the world record attempt, and worked with numerous different athletes all across the space. So that's kind of where my passion for mountain biking started in terms of my work career. But I was also fortunate enough to race as well. So I used to race cross country, made it out to a few World Cups, and got over to some EWS enduro races as well. But some old knees and a bit of a knackered body has sort of stopped all of that. So definitely my focus these days is mainly on the research. And what I'm going to talk to you today about is two sort of different areas of research that we're currently looking at. So a few years ago now, we did some work with British cycling and a wider population. And what we were looking at was e-bike users within Great Britain. And then some of the work that we're currently looking at is we're looking at some Strava Metro data. So Strava Metro is a sort of research arm of Strava, and they allow academics to apply for grants. They give out 10 global grants a year, and we're currently one of the holders. And that gives us access to data solely from Scotland. So today we're just going to focus in just on one of those sites of that data as well. So many of you are mountain bikers. Some of you I recognise faces, so you'll have seen little bits of the research that I'm going to present today. But I thought it was good just to have a little recap in terms of where we're at with e-bikes and what the current context of that is. So the e-bike market is currently estimated to be around $6.49 billion. The forecast is for that to continue to grow. There are lots of different numbers that are banded around in this space, but the current forecast thinks around $11.73 billion by 2030. We're seeing e-bikes are being used in lots of different ways, and we're definitely starting to see that e-bike growth within the mountain bike sector as well. And it's interesting when we look at some of the research that's out there in terms of the consumers. They believe that they're there for people who are environmentally conscious, and that there's different things that are starting to drive individuals into this space. So lack of physical fitness has been previously reported as one of the key drivers for e-bike use in female users. And we're starting to see or get some good evidence now that e-bike use or e-bikes across the boards might be able to prolong cycling lifespan. So that gives us a little bit of context, but let's get into some of the detail of the data that we've actually been collected in this space. So the first research study that I would like to talk to you about today is a study where we essentially sent out questionnaires to different e-bikers, and we managed to get 1,341 valid responses back from that. And that was we got quite a good demographic in terms of the individuals from around GB. So 68% from England, and 22% from Scotland, and 10% from Wales. In terms of the makeup or the characteristics of those riders, 20% of the respondents were female, 79% were male, and 1% did not tell us what gender they identified as. Interestingly, from this research, what we saw was that 78% of the riders were experienced e-mountain bikers, so they already owned a bike and were using that space. But we also got 22% of individuals who were curious, and that's quite novel for us. Normally, when we do this sort of research, we'll only really engage with populations who are already taking part in the sport, so it was quite nice for us to see people that were curious about this sport were actually responding to us as well. In terms of just a little bit more detail about some of the backgrounds, 96% of those individuals who responded were white. The main age demographic of those individuals was 35 to 64 years old. That age demographic does skew slightly in terms of when we've looked at previous research, we've definitely seen that to be a little bit younger. And around 15% of those that responded either identified as having a disability or a long-term health condition. And that's higher than what we would see if we surveyed sort of normal sports in the general population. So it's interesting to try and understand that a little bit more. We then asked them some questions just around how often they have been cycling for. 60% of the population said that they had cycled. I always laugh about this. I'm never really sure what to call a non-electric bike, analog bike, whatever your terminology is that you like now, but had been cycling mountain bikes for over a 10-year period. And 63% of that population had been cycling an e-bike for less than 2 years, which really demonstrates to us that it is still quite an emerging sport. In terms of how the riders told us about their skill level, 63% identified as having an intermediate skill level. 70% of riders identified as trail riders rather than enduro, downhill, or cross country. And 72% of those individuals who we surveyed gave us a thumbs up and said that they can find the sort of perfect trails that they want to ride within these spaces. We also asked a little bit around what sort of seasons these riders were riding their bikes in, and what we found was that they were no longer playing favourites with the seasons. So they were riding equal amounts all the way throughout the year, which again was quite interesting for us to look at. We then wanted to try and find out a little bit more about the motivation of these riders to ride their bikes. And play and mental health were the two main motivators that came out in terms of the survey of why these individuals actually went in to ride bikes. Interestingly, when we started to look at demographics in slightly different ways, we found that females reported riding with friends and families as extremely important, and that was different to the other cohorts that we found within this space. Out of all of the reasons why people ride their bike, risk was the least important to those individuals. In terms of the main barrier that we found of why people are currently not adopting e-bikes was cost was the main barrier for them. And when we asked, why do you ride and what is that really doing in terms of your riding habits, what we started to find was that the individuals were reporting that they could cycle further. So 83% of the respondents said they could cycle further. 79% said that they could cycle faster. And and 63% were saying that they were able to cycle more laps and more technical uphills. So it was enabling them to do some things in the trails that maybe previously they hadn't been able to. And in this research, we were interested to find out, are e-bikes changing riders' habits? So when they're faced with the trail, do they start to make different choices? Are they cutting into desire lines? Are they looking for quicker ways? Are they cutting new parts of the trails as they're on the bikes? And what we found was that everyone was a little bit naughty all of the time. So the majority of the riders were sticking to the trails and the rules that they would associate with the trails, but sometimes if they were maybe trying to nip away quickly, they would maybe use a desire line, but it wasn't something that they were seeking out within this space. We then went on to ask what the riders' experience was when they were on the trails, and what we found in that space was 11% of the e-mountain bikers confessed to having a few more bumps on the trail since hopping onto an e-bike. So around 11% said that they experienced a little bit more conflict within that space. And it was a little bit of a mixed bag in terms of when we then questioned what was that conflict that they were experiencing. Some reported being called cheaters, and others reported that it was the speed differential between the two parties that was actually creating some of this conflict. There were some reports, so we also followed this questionnaire data up with some focus groups, and that was really re-emphasised within that space. So one of the main areas of conflict definitely seemed to be the speed differential, catching up on people, trying to zip in front of them, and just sort of regular trail behaviour or trail etiquette not really always being followed. And we really believe in this space that education is really important. So educating both e-bikers and non-e-bikers in order to be able to try and alleviate some of these conflicts that are happening. And since this research, we've put out some videos and we're trying to get sort of a more aligned approach in terms of the touch points of where people or the touch points people would hit with their e-bikes to try and make sure that they're aware of how people are experiencing some of the when they're on the trail as well. So some of those simple messaging are just, around the use of bells, keeping that turbo a little bit in check, making sure that when they're approaching people, they're making sure people can hear them, and they're just not really trying to catch people out by surprise. And for the non-e-bikers, we were really trying to promote the message of that e-bikes are legal within these spaces, and that they are really there to experience the same vibes as most people that are out in that trail. So they want to have some fun while they're there. So from that research, we've concluded a few things so far. So first, we concluded that e-bikes play a crucial role in extending how long we can cycle for. So we're starting to see an increase in that demographic, and I will touch on that in a little bit more in the next part of this presentation. But it appears that they're helping us to stay more active for a greater number of years. So we're seeing this in e-bike research sort of across the board now, everything from the commuter all the way through into recreational riders as well. It also appears that these bikes might actually be able to have a significant impact on participation. Like I said, we had 15% of individuals who either had a disability or long-term health conditions saying that they were using the bikes, and that's higher than what we've seen in the sport when we've surveyed them previously. So it appears like there's a bit of room and space in order to be able to sort of diversify within that space so that everyone can really enjoy the benefits of cycling. And we definitely got strong reports of improvements of mental health, and that riding e-bikes weren't just around physical exercise, but it was also about enhancing well-being and mental clarity as well. So far, the data would suggest that e-bikes are mainly being used by individuals who already mountain bike, and they appear to allow these individuals to continue with the sport for a longer period of time, which is super awesome in my eyes. However, I do think there's a real drive or a real need for us to try and think about how we can diversify this community even further. Our data currently is suggesting that different groups of riders have different motivations for the trails, and who they want to ride within those spaces. So again, I think it's important for us to consider that moving forwards, so that we can really start to build these communities and offer a much wider range of trail architecture to see this sort of greater diversity. So the next part I'm going to move on to is a little bit of a case study. So this data is coming purely from the Strava data. Now, there are limits with the data of what we have access to, but I'll present what we currently have at the moment. This is all of this data I'm about to show you is focusing only on Glentress. I'm sure everyone here is aware of Glentress, but there's around 154 kilometres of trail, and it was the original bike park within the UK. And those trails are graded on their complexity from our greens all the way up to our blacks. You will see a little inset here, which is highlighted. And this is a new area of trails that have just gone in. So they came in late 2023. And they're more bike park gravity led, whereas the previous trails on the site were much more cross-country led. And I'm going to refer back to these just as I present some of the data. So it's just to highlight a little bit of the what we're currently seeing. So in terms of the rider demographics currently, this is looking at over a 5-year period. So it's looking at from 2000 all the way to 2024 inclusively. We are currently generating the 2025 data, and I will be adding that in once we have completed the year. So currently what we've seen over that 5-year period is that there have been 595,000 riders on site. 90K of those have been women, 503K men, and 2K have not specified their gender. Interestingly, for this, that works out at around 15% of the demographic from those users as female and 85% as male. So already we can see that from the survey data, there appears to be less women within the Strava data, and that might be something associated with that demographic and whether they want to use app-based devices as well. But we're really interested in this data because we believe that we've not really had access to such good site data before, just to see how people are actually using these trails. And this is just a bit of a graphic representation of how those numbers have changed. So the female are the light blue at the bottom, the males are the darker blue on top, and you can see that there has been a gradual increase in rider number over the years. We also have had a look at that data in terms of the age groups of those individuals. And we see the predominant age group, or the individuals who are riding on that site, are between 35 to 54 years old. Interestingly, we are starting to see a bit of an increase. So on the figure here, the orange is the 55 to 64-year-old category. So we're starting to see a bit of an increase within those numbers. So I'm sorry that not all of the numbers are present on that, but in the first year, so that's 2020, that number was down at 4.6K, and then that's gone up to 7K within 2021, and so on. In terms of that 65 plus age group, we are starting to see that grow as well. So from 2020, or number one, that is the year there were 335 individuals who were 65 and above, and that grew to 810 in the category number 2, 1,000 in category number 3, 1.4 thousand in category number 4 and up to 2.1 thousand. So there definitely seems to be a little bit of a movement in terms of that age demographic that we're seeing on the site there. And then we were interested to have a look to see what's been changing over those years in terms of mountain bike use, or with e-bikes and regular mountain bikes. And as you can see, this data is actually showing you the total number of laps that have been ridden on these sites. And without a doubt, regular or analog mountain bikes are still predominantly the most ridden bikes on those sites, and they're riding the biggest number of laps. And during that period of 2020 to 2024, we've seen a 48% increase in the number of laps of those bikes. However, you'll notice that although lower, we're seeing a much bigger increase in e-bikes from 2020 to 2024. So we've had an 800% increase within those bikes. So the next slide is going to focus only on those e-mountain bikers, okay? So I'm not going to report anything more in terms of the regular mountain bikers at the site. So the first thing that we were interested in, and again, this data is over that 5-year period of time, we were just interested to try and have a look to see where these riders are actually riding, what sort of trails are they looking for. And when we looked at it over that 5-year period, we saw that, again, the most number of laps were happening within the black trails, slightly less on the red, slightly less on the blue. Now, I have to highlight on this slide, so the green is significantly lower. However, due to storm damage and different things that have been happening at that site, we couldn't actually get any data off of the green trails from the older years. And all of those green trails that you see presented here are actually from the new bike park, or that indent that I highlighted just at the beginning. So that data is a little bit skewed in terms of the green trail use. We then broke that data into a few different things. So we were interested to see how many of those laps were happening in the old cross-country trails, so the sort of traditional trails there. We then looked at that new indent, so they are the new bike park trails within that space. And then also we have a number of unauthorised trails that are within that site as well. So they've come around from enduro races and previous historic events on the site. So we were able to go in on a trail by trail basis and pull out this data to see how many riders have actually been using these as well. And again, I just have to highlight in terms of the new bike park, that data is only from the tail end of 2023 and a full year in 2024, whereas the old cross-country trails there are from 2020 all the way up to 2025. So then we were interested to have a look to see actually what happens in that space when we just look at 2024, when we know that we have actually a full year's worth of data of these trails. Are we starting to see changes occurring within that space? And when we looked at that year specifically, we did start to see a difference. So what we found was an even spread of individuals who were riding e-bikes on the black, the red and the blue trails. And then we were interested to see actually out of those other subcategories that we looked at, what trails were the sort of the rider's choice. And for the first time on that site, what we saw was the new bike park trails were the most ridden trails over and above the old cross-country trails within Glentress. We were also able to pull off the most ridden trails on those sites, and all of the most ridden trails again were within the new bike park. For those of you who aren't aware of the site or haven't been up since that has been developed, it's a very short fire track climb and then you're straight into a more gravity-led downhill. So it would appear that we're starting to see a change in the way that the risers are using this site. Whereas previously it looked like the e-mountain bikers were using it to ride the old cross-country trails. Now it looks like they're trying to really maximise the amount of downhill that they're getting when they're going onto these sites. So moving more into a sort of snow sport, sort of up and down characteristic. And in terms of that data so far, what we can conclude from that, is that mountain bike riders are still riding more laps in comparison to the e-mountain bike riders. The growth appears to be higher in the e-mountain bike in terms of percentage. The e-mountain bike riders appear to prefer the shorter laps that enable more downhill sections. And the data that we have access to at the moment is indicating very little change in terms of the trail user and the trail demographic. That is me for today. We are obviously just in the middle of sort of mining this data and looking at different sites now, and hopefully we'll get some more insights coming out. But Robin asked me to be around a minute. Sorry, I have gone over that slightly. But yeah, thank you for listening, and thanks again for having me, Robin. I'll just stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you so much, Lesley. So I am going to go off script slightly because I think it'd be good to give everyone a chance to ask you questions about your presentation before we move on to sort of the workshop format. So yeah, so if anyone's got any questions specifically about what Lesley presented before I start asking you guys questions, please have a think about it and put your hands up using the little hands up thing or wave your arms. I'll start off with one, although I have seen you raise your hand, Andy. Just go back to the first half of your presentation and the academic research. And obviously you're somewhat constrained, I suppose, by research that's been published and the age of that research to a certain extent, and says what you can pull off. But I was sort of the research that was pointing to people taking up, using e-bikes through lack of fitness. I mean, if you've got any insight into whether you think that still holds true currently, or if that's just historic, or do you think that's, I don't know?
Yeah, so that did come from historic research. So I think that was around sort of 2020, maybe a little bit older, actually, some of that research. I haven't seen anything updated in that space, but I definitely think from what people have reported sort of on sites is that demographic has shifted quite significantly, and that definitely I think actually just to run that study again now would be a really interesting thing to see where that demographic has actually where that's got to and kind of what the main drivers are for those individuals. I think we've also learned quite a lot in that space, so I think I personally would be really interested just in order to be able to sort of delve a little bit deeper into some of those motivations of those individuals nowadays.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose, just sort of based on my own experience, it does seem there's definitely been a change over the years in terms of people that early adopted e-bikes and where we are today. And it does seem to me that, at least based on my experience of riding in Surrey and in South Wales, in particular, that everyone's e-biking now. It's not and it may skew slightly. I'm sure there's a difference in demographic and types of user between analog bikers and e-bikers, but broadly speaking, it does seem that everyone's e-biking now just to sort of enhance their mountain biking experience. I've got more questions for you, but I'll let Andy go next.
I think we spoke about this at the IMBA conference, but I'm pretty sure, I didn't manage to see this when I was there, but we should be able to do the same thing for the Forest of Dean, I reckon. I've definitely, last time I was in Strava, which is probably about 2 years ago, I'm pretty sure we could get that same sort of data out.
Yeah. That would be really That would be really useful. So essentially, that's what we're trying to do now, sort of across Scotland and different sites, because we've only got access to Scotland. And it's definitely an area of interest in terms of continuing to develop this work and to look at different sites. But yeah, we'd be really keen to do that. And if we can download it, we've got some quicker ways now that we can start to process some of this data as well.
I think it all just comes out in a big spreadsheet, doesn't it? So.
Yeah. That'd be great.
Kostas, you got a question?
Hi. Thanks, Lesley, for the presentation. It's very interesting things. I would just have one question. In the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that you see it as, let me go back to it, as an emergent sport. Do you see the electric bike as being a separate discipline, or is it something that's been coming out from your research, perhaps from your qualitative work?
I guess in terms of, I mean, that's maybe a little bit of my terminology as well. So I guess as a sports scientist, we see it as a separate entity at that sort of competitive level. But I don't necessarily see it as a different discipline at the recreational level of where individuals are partaking in it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, it does feel like the same thing sometimes, and other times it doesn't. You know, sometimes it feels like a completely different sport, depending on how you're riding the bikes and stuff like that. But I won't. I'll ask more questions about your presentation. So yeah, and then when you again in the first half of your presentation, you were talking about sort of increased reported conflict. Have you got any insight as to whether that increase came from increased conflict between analog and e-bike riders, you know, i.e. within mountain biking, or increased conflict with other user groups on the trails, i.e. horse riders and walkers and dog walkers, etc.?
So the 11% was from questionnaire-based data, and those individuals just reported whether they had increased conflict or not, and we didn't get any more depth of data within that. But we did follow this up with some focus groups from individuals who had completed the survey, and at that point, there was the majority of experiences where they were reporting on sites, and it was with other bike users within those spaces. But again, I don't have. It was a small part that sort of came out of that study. I think it's, you know, I would be interested to see what that's like now as well, and whether that's changed.
Okay, fair enough. James, you were waving your hand in the air, so you go next. You need to take yourself off. Yeah, cool.
There we go. Hi, Lesley. Thank you. Great information there. Brilliant to hear that. I wondered whether if you've ever been able to correlate the data that you collect with the way the media portray mountain biking and e-biking, and whether or not there is a relevance to that, and whether or not it's worth investigating how the media push e-bikes and who they push them to, as to whether or not that could potentially alter completely the demographic if they altered their marketing.
Yeah, so no is the answer. I haven't correlated anything with that. So I'm definitely a fan of any form of sport that can keep people active for longer periods of time. And I definitely think there's a space in the e-mountain bike market for us to consider the best ways for that to happen on the trails, and to kind of promote to different communities or diverse communities in order for that to be able to help. As a side to this project and data that I haven't presented today, we've been doing a lot of work around getting individuals or evaluating projects that get individuals out onto the trail, and looking at sort of mental health and alterations to their mental health and how connected they feel to different things. And I definitely think in those spaces, for some of the new people that we've brought in, when they've been able to have an e-bike in order to be able to do some of that. It's really changed their experience, because I think a lot of the time with people who don't mountain bike or haven't mountain biked in the past, some of the barriers or the challenges associated in that space are removed relatively quickly. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be done in terms of marketing to sort of diversify the sport. And I can see Fiona's here, so Fiona definitely can add way more to that than I can.
Cool. Kieran.
Hi, yeah, so Kieran from the Byways and Bridleways Trust. So I had two brief questions on the stuff there. Firstly, on Robin's point on the conflict, we discussed the speed differentials here. Have we got any real idea on what that median differential is? Is it, are e-bikers going 20% faster or 10% faster on a median?
We don't know yet. So this is something that I've kind of gone back to Strava with. Currently, what they do in the Strava Metro data is we don't get the full access to data. So we can pull off parts of that. So we can get average speeds of trails, but we can't at the moment break that down into the different bike users. So I have fed that back, saying that would be a really beneficial thing to add into the program and to help.
Yeah, I've got Strava Metro access as well, so yeah, I recognise that. And the second question I had was, I recall from the previous study, the Forestry Commission one on the different types of trails, there was quite a heavy bias towards the e-bikers actually riding a lot more moderate trails. So, sticking to forest roads and things like that. So do we think that the differences that you're seeing at Glentress there are because of the nature of the, shall we say, the location and the development of the new bike park facilities, or have we seen a bit of a change in use between the old cross-country trails and the forestry, and we haven't got the data for the green trails, obviously, but sort of the blue trails and the forest roads. Are we seeing a big differential on that?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things to sort of unpack from that. So I think, first of all, we've got to be aware that the Strava data is limited, and not everyone that's riding their bikes are using Strava data. So we're trying to work a little bit with some of our partners to see if we can get some trail counters on some of these trails as well, to almost collaborate what's actually happening within. Yeah, absolutely, just to sort of get a bit of a better feel for that. I think we're quite early in this analysis, so it's quite difficult for me to really be able to answer. But we are just moving on to also look at Innerleithen as a site, because obviously it's a completely different type of trail there. It's much more enduro, it's natural trails, and it's governed, or it's looked after by a trail association. So we're quite interested to when we start to pull that data off, just to sort of make those comparisons to see if we what we're seeing in terms of that demographic, and if we start to see shifts based around that site. And
I'm doing some work with Kielder at the moment, and the new Reivers Trail set, and also we've got the Lakeside Way there, which is, of course, is a very different user demographic. I think that might be interesting to talk about with you, and we can pull some data from there, and I can discuss that with you.
Yeah, that would be really great.
Because it's just such a massively different user demographic.
Yeah.
Just to add to that before I hand over to Sam to ask his question, I mean, yeah, I suppose it's just worth pointing out that the survey that was done, I mean, that was done like 3-4 years ago now, wasn't it?
Yeah, a little bit longer, yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, it's, things may have changed over that since then. B, also, it was a self, you put a call out for people to take the survey, so it's hard to know how representative that survey was in aggregate, I presume, or not. Or do you feel it was there's enough.
Yeah, no, and I think it's always the same with surveys. There's always a bias to people who want to answer surveys and to tell us certain things about that. Yeah, I feel like we got quite a good response rate. So to get that response, and when we looked at the percentages across sort of GB, it felt quite representative of GB in terms of what we were seeing in that space. But I think the bigger thing is that the sport, the use of those bikes have changed so dramatically within that period of time that I think, if we were just to run that survey again, we would see quite stark differences in that data.
Yeah, and also you had to use certain channels to get the survey out to the mountain biking public. And the impression I got at the time is you might have missed certain aspects, certain people actually probably on both sides. The people are more sort of on the enduro side that aren't following British Cycling's or Forestry England's social media to know about the survey. But then also, to Kieran's point, people that aren't following those channels because they're more, occasional users that are more likely to be using Forest Pass perhaps as well. It's hard to know, isn't it? And I suppose the other thing to just to highlight for everyone is obviously that the Strava data you're getting obviously is also self-selecting in terms of people are, it's the people that are using Strava as an app, not all mountain bikers. And I suppose also, the growth that you've seen over that 4-year period in that data may be at least partially due to more people using Strava itself rather than more people riding more. I don't know. Have you got any insight into that in particular or not?
No, but I think I can get some insight into that.
Yeah, because in theory, Strava should know. Whether they will tell you or not is a different question, right? But they'll know how much that app has grown over that 4-year period, and therefore you could, in theory, deduplicate against that to actually work out what the true growth was, taking sort of removing Strava's growth from the equation to try and get an insight into what the real numbers are. But I imagine they'd be quite cagey about telling you how much they've grown over the last 4 years.
Robin, if I just say it's very unclear. Should we say what other sources Strava is pulling data from? You might have seen the recent lawsuit between Strava and Garmin, but I tried to get a clear idea from them, speaking to them some time ago about what other apps it was interacting with, and they were very, very cagey.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Sam, you've had a question for a while. Go ahead.
Hi, Lesley, thanks very much for the presentation. It was just a very brief question. I was quite curious on the small bit of data you gathered about those riders that claim to have disability, which is a reason for selecting e-biking. Did you have any more kind of depth of data around what kind of disabilities these riders were selecting e-bikes for?
Yes, I did. So, I can't remember, sorry, off the top of my head, but there were 3 areas. A lot of one of the key ones was long-term health conditions, and we specified based on disability guidance what that was. But I would have to follow up with you on that one. Sorry, just to I don't want to say the wrong part. And actually, I might be able to jump on while you're on the call. So if I can come back to you on that one, that would be great.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think it is because a few people in my local riding community ride e-bikes because of disabilities, and quite different. I've got someone that's got the dead on one leg below the knee, another person doesn't have a hand, and it's incredible how people are able to adapt e-mountain bikes. And I think when you were talking about the point of trying to diversify it, I just thought actually it's probably a really good opportunity to be able to make it a bit more known about the options of how you can make an e-bike more adaptive for different disabilities.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's definitely work to be done in this space as well. So with some of the disabilities that individuals have, actually they might need adaptations to the bike. So we followed up with some focus groups, and some of the individuals had chipped their bike, not because they were trying to go faster, but actually they needed more power just to get the bike going over certain obstacles with their disability. And I think that's a bit of a grey area that really needs to be explored further.
Cool. We'll try and get Lesley on the Trail Hub so she can ask questions offline after the presentation as well. There you go. I'll get another member for the Trail Hub out of this at least, which is great. Just on that, actually, was one of the questions I had at the very beginning of your presentation. So before you went on to the sort of survey data, you did say there was I can't remember exactly what you said, but what I took out of it, there was a higher proportion of people with disabilities using e-bikes than other sports. Is that right? Is that what that data told us?
From that data, yeah. Normally when we survey, it's sort of around sort of like 3 to 5%, and there was 15% of those respondents. So it again, it's one study in isolation, but it definitely seems to be higher than what we've seen previously.
Okay, and so that was actually from the survey data.
Yeah, that was from the survey data.
But then, I'm not trying to call you out here, but one of your conclusions, there were less women and marginalised users using e-bikes. Is that?
I guess so. What we're not seeing is any change in that demographic, really.
Right.
So, you know, and again, when we go and we sort of like look at the Strava data to kind of, so we can, that's again, one of the interesting areas from Strava that I asked as well, but they said they can't currently do it at the moment, was in those e-bike users, all I was trying to get was how many were male, how many were female, and they won't give us access to that data currently, but we just haven't, from the data that we collected, it was similar to what we'd seen and previously published in other e-bike across different disciplines.
Okay, fair enough. Right, Roddy, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really interesting area about the adaptive side of things. So yeah, it's good. Yeah, I was going to ask a little bit more about the kind of the classic thing of, oh, you're cheating, which anecdotally it usually seems to be just people having a bit of banter, and then maybe it doesn't mean to come out as harshly as it does. But I just thought it was kind of an interesting kind of area of like the different types of interactions that people have in the outdoors generally, which, you know, I think, you know, I'd be very surprised if those aren't overwhelmingly positive, because I think most of us recognise that we all just enjoy being outdoors and, you know, are happy for other people to be doing the same. But yeah, I wondered if you had insights into that kind of more broadly, kind of the kind of, I suppose, the emotions that people have. Like, I mean, maybe a sort of a parallel is if you're hiking and then somebody in their 80s is fell running and just zooms up past you over the summit, and, you know, there's a little bit of a feeling of like an achievement of getting to the top of the hill being diminished by somebody else doing it more easily or something. So yeah, just interested in insights in that kind of area.
Yeah, so it's not an area that we've looked into in very much detail. It was just more, that was kind of we just really asked the question on that questionnaire, have you experienced more conflict? And if the respondents said yes, then they were able to say what that conflict was. So they reported their being called a cheater. That was the main one that sort of came back from that. So again, I can't comment on whether that was sort of in jest, I guess, or not. But I guess the fact that people sort of reported it does sort of highlight that actually, you know, depending on, it might be in jest from one side of the party, but it might not be taken in from the other side. So it's definitely, it would be interesting to explore that a little bit in more detail. I would also be interested to see where that sort of conflict level's at now, because I definitely think in different sites we're seeing more reports of e-bikes, and I think there might be higher tensions in some places and lower tensions in others. And it would be really interesting to see, is that rider user, or is it sort of the education that's within that space, or are there different things that are coming in there?
Okay, so James has got his hand up. I'm going to make that the last question before we move on to our workshop. But so everyone could get thinking, what I'm going to ask you all after James has asked his questions, you've got time to think about it, is just if everyone could give us one, you know, just an anecdote of your local experience of the positive changes. So not negative, we'll come on to negative later, but the positive changes you've seen through eBike. So that could be some of the examples that Sam gave in terms of disabled riders, for example, or anything positive about the change you've seen to your local mountain biking scene as a result of e-bikes. And then obviously after that we'll do a round of negatives as well. But James, ask your question.
So it's locally, the secret trails are ridden by a completely different group of people who are like the casual sort of pub social riders, and the pub social riders don't really complain about e-bikers because the mixed groups tend to be some e-bikes and some normal bikes. But then the guys that build the illegal trails point to e-bikes putting extra pressure on the secret trails and increasing the damage to them, and that is definitely a cause for conflict. That is an indirect cause for conflict, and if they saw them, they would probably then have their backup even before they spoke to them. So if they then zoom past them, they'll then be grumpy or say something negative to them. So it's certainly locally, that's how it seems to be unfolding.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Lesley.
Sorry, I was just going to say we got a little bit of data, and it was a very small amount from the forestry around that space as well, and they were and some different actually trail locations, and they definitely were reporting sort of like wear on the trail at different points, and having to maintain different things, and also older obstacles were maybe having to be adapted or changed because the entry speed or the exit speed from those had become greater because of the e-bikes, maybe the speed that they can come into them. I think it's an area again that's really under researched, and it would be really nice to get some firm research in terms of these different sites. And what we see with those with the different types of bike on them.
Okay, cool. Well, look, actually, because there are so many of us, rather than coming to everyone twice, I'll ask you to say something, some positive experience of e-bikes and then a negative local experience of e-bikes. James, seeing as you're unlucky enough to ask the last questions, you can go first.
Well, the major positive is that the Thursday night social group that ends up at the pub there's a real mix of age group and fitness, and the more unfit guys can just ride with us on their e-bikes, and we all just ride and talk together, and it's really brilliant.
And negative?
I don't. Maybe the trail wear, because e-bikes tend to have bigger downhill tires, so they do put excess wear on the trails. But hey, we could manage that if the local landowners would allow us to do maintenance, because the weather can throw in that wear overnight if it's horrific enough. So there is wear, but it's also the environment can also create that same wear. So it's a negative, but I couldn't think of anything else.
Okay. Daniel, you're next on my screen.
I suppose the positives are I've got friends who would have packed it in by now, particularly, I'm not young, but particularly friends in their 50s who have maybe suffered injuries. And you definitely see more disabled riders, I think, than you would have seen. So I think that's all really positive. I think my negative would be I think as a sport, we've already got a bit of a gap, a socioeconomic gap in terms of the barrier to entry for the sport, and I do worry that it widens it and makes it harder for people on lower incomes to actually get into the sport, and it will feel less inclusive for those, because their perception of the sport is you need a £4,000 or £5,000 bike, and that's just for the frame, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay. Ian, you're next on my screen. And you're on mute.
Yep. As I said, opening up the sport to so many people, I think it really just makes it that little bit more accessible for people that are starting out, and especially if they're joining a group of mixed ability and everyone's on the e-bike, it levels the playing field. I think the negatives are kind of the perception around making sure people know what is an e-bike and what is an e-motorbike. And I think that causes a lot of trouble, and certainly going to cause more trouble going forward. But I think we can probably work on that one and work out what we need to do to get that message across, that we're not all riding around on e-motorbikes.
Yeah. Cool. Jacob, you're next. Try and keep it local to Cannock Chase.
All right, cheers. Yeah, I mean, I think the positive experience is the same as what everyone else has been saying, that it's good to just have more bums and saddles, really. And if e-bikes allow more people to do that, then that's a good thing. As for negatives, yeah, I mean, I will do a local one. So we get a lot of there's a lot of comments on Facebook from other like kind of land users, because Cannock Chase, I don't know if people are familiar with it, but it's one of the most like heavily used bits of like forest in all of Western Europe. It has like millions of people can access it within about 15 miles. So it's relatively large, but it's very well used. And at least my perception is that it's increased like the speeds of people on fire roads, and they're sharing those fire roads with dog walkers and stuff. And that means that there's a lot more people going on. I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily true, but at least my perception of it is there's more people kind of raging out in Facebook groups and stuff at mountain bikers in general, because obviously, like, the average person doesn't know the difference between an e-bike and a normal mountain bike.
Cool, thank you. Who is next on my screen? Jez, you're next on my screen.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yeah, just
right.
about.
Positives. Yeah, definitely the positives are keeping people riding longer. So, yeah, I'm in that age group. So I have an analog Wednesday and a WeBike Saturday, because it's a longer ride. And it means I can keep up with all the youngsters. And it's good fun because I've got a very quiet e-bike. So when I start pedaling uphill and they don't notice and they're talking, I can make them blow out the various orifices that they didn't know they had. So it makes it very entertaining. And then every now and again, the cotton on and go, we're not chasing him anymore. So yeah, I think definitely that's the plus side. It's definitely keeping more people riding, and friends who've got injuries, coming back from injuries, people who've bought e-bikes to get themselves going again. Another guy who sort of said, oh, I wouldn't be riding now if it wasn't for the e-bike, because I was starting to hate it. And now he likes it again because he's back on the bike. Negatives. I'm not really seeing a great deal of wear that I would put down to e-bikes. I put it more down to people who now ride an e-bike but can't ride, if you're with me, because they've just gone to the local hire shop, particularly in places like Dalby, where they go and hire the bikes for the day and they can't even change gear. So all they do is change power and spin out and things like that. And most of the wear, to be honest, is on climbs, because they're using a lot of power and they can't get round corners and things like that. So I'm not seeing that as an issue. Possibly using demarcation features as now they can ride over. So there's lumps at the side you're meant to go round and things like that. Well, with on an e-bike, it's more fun to go over them. So we have sort of issues with muck being dragged onto the train, which wouldn't have done before because nobody could be bothered to ride over it because it was hard work. And then I think the perception of there's the group I would call motorbikers. So they just want more power. You know what I mean? They want the Amflow, they want whatever. And they're the haul and drop people. So they haul up there as fast as possible and drop, and then it's haul and drop, haul and drop, haul and drop. And I think possibly that's the group that causes the most aggro, because they just want to do what they want to do, and they're not that be nice, say hi. So that has created a few issues, I think, with people like that, where they're charging around a bit. But then I'm seeing a lot more youngsters riding them as well. So you know, I call them because they're young and they don't need them, but they seem to love riding them. So it's definitely broadening the scope, I think, of mountain biking and making it definitely more available to a wider group of people.
Cool. Thank you. Who's next? Kieran, you're next on my screen.
Yeah, so, well, positives on a personal front. Well, 12.5 stone lost this year. So it got me back on my bike.
Brilliant.
That's possibly, you know, the easiest one. The negatives, I would say, I'm seeing a lot more sessioning. You know, actually people just doing that constant sessioning of the same section of trail again and again and again. And I think that is definitely the sections of trail I can think of in my local woods that I've seen deteriorate massively over the last couple of years.
Okay, cool. Kostas, you're next on my screen. Do you want to introduce yourself as well, Kostas? Because it's just your name currently.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, my name is Kostas Stavrianakis, and I'm a researcher, and I also do some work with e-mountain bikes and social perceptions from Robert Gordon University up in Scotland. So one positive thing we've noticed with e-mountain bikes is that you have different family members with different like fitness levels, and that allows for the family, by using e-mountain bikes, to have some good quality time all together. That's definitely something that happened like in our family the past year. It's been great. Negatives, I think, from my understanding, e-mountain bikes came a bit too fast in our lives, and land managers haven't had the chance to figure it out. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of some of those conflicts. So I think, as people have mentioned before, a bit more education and awareness is definitely needed. That's all.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Lucinda, you're next on my list.
Hiya. The positive I've seen is lots of my adult friends have brought their teenagers out on rides with them, because the teenagers are taking the e-bikes off them and the adults are riding their analogues. So that's nice to see them out. The negative would just be trail etiquette when they're having a bit of a race and then the red mist is down. They sort of lose that trail etiquette sometimes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Pippa, you're next. And you're on mute currently, but I think you can do it. You realise that.
Okay. Hi. Just because I haven't been on this forum before, just so you can place me. I'm in Mid Wales, so I'm in the Edinburgh Valley, where we've got a couple of little trails, but my main trail centre is Nantrarian. Okay. So I am a mountain bike leader and I am a breeze leader, and what I have noticed is so many more older women now coming out on the trails and coming out on breeze rides. I led a ride yesterday, and 6 out of 8 women were on the e-bikes, and the average age was well over 55. And those women wouldn't be riding if they weren't on e-bikes. So that's fantastic. And also, from a personal point of view, I ride an e-bike, and I can lead people longer and harder on that e-bike. I would struggle on my analog. Okay. I think anecdotally, the downside, negatives, is when you have a mechanical that's not fixable and you have to get that bike back.
Especially if you're leading the ride, I imagine, Pippa. Yeah, that's a very good point. Who is Roddy? You're next on my screen.
No. So I'll say a positive is the really good mules for trail building. So you can get up high quickly and you can just shuttle back and forward and test stuff after building. So it's good as a tool from that point of view. Possibly that's maybe a bit of an antidote to the increased trail wear, is to allow more trail building. to maintain the trails, as there's maybe there's something in that. I think something that's kind of particular to where I am, and probably others as well, but maybe not everybody, is that we're kind of on a quite a high escarpment. So basically the terrain is, the Ochil Hills go from sea level to 700 meters, and it's just really, really steep. So I know that it's a bit of a concern that the mountain rescue has when they look out and see a solo rider at night up in the hills. It's, I suppose, yeah, just being able to get into trouble, and that's, I think, possibly an area where there should be a bit more education on being safe in the outdoors. I think, you'll have people who are, used to, are good riders, used to riding trail centres, but maybe aren't, so clued up when it comes to what to take, what to pack, weather forecasting. So I mean, I come from a skiing background, and in sort of backcountry snow sports, that's a huge thing. People, you just sort of have conversations with your buddies that you're going out with about, what you're packing, what the weather's doing, and possibly with e-bikes, it's just all too easy to just go, oh, let's just go, and not be prepared for being up in mountains.
Oh yeah, that's a really good point. Right, who's next? Ruth, you're next on my screen. Sorry to put it as well. If you could introduce yourself as well, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm a mountain bike leader based in Shropshire. So yeah, this is the first time on this call. So hello everybody. I think from what I've seen, certainly the groups who I've been taking out, they've been, I've seen that females in particular have felt more confident to join some of my group rides. When they've turned up on an e-bike, they've specifically contacted me and said, is it okay if I bring an e-bike? Yeah, sure. And so it's seen as like one less reason not to come out on a group ride, which is really good. But it seems to be particularly women who feel like, they're not going to be able to keep up with the group. They're not going to have the fitness level, and it's I think a lot of the time it's a perceived thing anyway. But they just feel like it's like one reason why they should give it a go, which is great. One less barrier to getting everyone out and riding bikes. And I think negatives, I would probably reiterate what Roddy was just saying about education. They're great tools. E-bikes are brilliant fun. I've got one myself. I don't use it a lot, but they're great. And I think there's a potential for people to get into difficulty if they're sort of relatively new to the sport in particular. It's amazing how quickly you can get into the hills on these things without giving it a second thought. But then what happens if there's an incident? You have a mechanical, a medical issue, the clag comes in. And I think tied to that is an education piece around where you can ride as well. I've seen a lot of e-bikers sort of riding around on any trails without really paying attention to whether they can legally ride there or not. And I think there's enough controversy about mountain bikers, and where they can ride in England and Wales without, the ability, in addition, for people without sort of that knowledge to start sort of riding around on trails and causing that wear and tear when they're actually on a footpath and not supposed to be there as well. So yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
Cool, thank you, Ruth. Sam, you're next on the screen.
Okay, yeah, so my personal thought on it, so I've got a toddler and I've been able to borrow my dad's e-bike, so being able to kind of take a toddler on a kids ride shotgun on an e-bike completely opens up what you can do as a family, so that's been an absolutely fantastic thing to do. I've seen quite a few people have made a couple of points about the trail etiquette as a negative, so I've tried to think of something different. It's hard, but I think e-bikers that are newer to it, that have less mechanical sympathy, are more likely to land themselves with a much bigger mechanical bill. So I think that's a little bit of a risk. I know plenty of e-bikers that either smash up the drivetrains because they don't shift properly, or they put a jet washer into their motor. So I think there's definitely an opportunity to teach people a little bit more about mechanical sympathy when it comes to e-bikes.
That's a really good point. Right, who is next? Tony, you're next on my screen.
Evening, everybody. From a positive point of view, there's a group around Northampton that stemmed from the creation of the bike park of over 50 riders, and that has grown with the use of e-bikes, people that wouldn't normally have ridden, and quite a few couples come out on that ride, which is great to see. I don't have an e-bike myself. I'm fortunate enough to be able to keep up with most of them. From a negative point of view, is group rides again. We've lost touch with a few people that have bought e-bikes. Those of us that don't have them, because we couldn't keep up with the better riders, and they're riding different rides. So it's split us up.
Right, so they're now doing e-bike only rides, so they don't want to wait for the analog riders, basically.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could see how that might happen. Zoe,
so a lap round Landegler would be different for me, definitely, these days.
Yeah. Right, Zoe, you're last on my list, although both myself and Lesley need to go as well. But go, Zoe.
Hi. So yeah, for us as a family, we've got an e-bike that myself, my daughter, and my son can ride. And it's massively opened things up for the kids. You know, I've got a 16, a 12, and a 9-year-old, and actually the 12-year-old tows the 9-year-old, and we're on our analog bikes. So like we can go to FOD and we can do, 7 or 8 full runs down and not need to pay for the uplift. And it's really brought their skills on. And I think we're seeing that with some of the younger riders coming through, in that, the likes of George Wilkes at all the races, his dad would be towing him up the climbs. And so he's got more energy for the downs. And, the kids are able to go to harder terrain and learn those skills that they just wouldn't have been able to access before. And it's the same for me as a rider. I can try a trail multiple times in a run, and I can get better skilled at doing that run. The other positive is with Girls Alive, we have women that are in their 50s and 60s that wouldn't have come on normal rides because they just wouldn't have kept up. Their fitness isn't there and their health's not there. We've got one lady, she goes on her e-gravel bike for the gravel rides. She goes on her e-road bike, and she has an e-mountain bike as well. So that was something I just wanted to touch on for the research, is that obviously there are multiple different types kind of off-road biking, and some of those people kind of doing gravel riding may well be moving into that e-gravel as well. Yeah, I think the downside, I've definitely seen it when I'm out on is the etiquette thing, is like people just trying to like hoon past you on the fire roads and stuff, and it can be a bone of contention. I think a lot of people don't just shout out and say hi, passing on your right. There's definitely some of that cheater aspect. There's this kind of thing of, I've had it before, where it's like, well, you're too young to be on an e-bike. The kids shouldn't be on e-bikes because they're too young, and kind of not being aware of kind of that thing. And also, like, I'm seeing that some of those people have a lack of skill, because the e-bike can be very forgiving in that you don't actually have to hold your speed around corners. You can just pedal brake, and that style of riding can be very different from if somebody's come from an analog bike and then moved on to an e-bike. What we see within Girls Alive is that there are still far fewer women on e-bikes than men, whereas kind of like general in mountain biking, the women's scene is a little bit behind the men's scene. And it's another barrier in that they're not a cheap item. They are more expensive than a regular bike to get even. So a lot of women, today is the day where women are now working for free for the rest of the year with the gender pay gap. So that's just something to mention. But I think also was that the research was showing us that actually most of the e-bikers are typically coming from they've already ridden bikes for a long time, so they're not seemingly opening it up to as many new people as perhaps we might think, or that's certainly what that data is showing us. Whether anecdotally the experience is different, I don't know. But yeah, I think in the Surrey Hills, if you go out now, you are very much in the minority on a normal bike. It is predominantly e-bikes. It's a fairly affluent demographic, predominantly in Surrey. So yeah, you're certainly seeing that. I've seen people going up trails the wrong way. We're definitely getting some of that sessioning of particularly really steep trails that you wouldn't necessarily do lots and lots of times on an analog, because you just wouldn't want to do that climb, that many times for a 20-second track. And that's causing wear in areas that isn't ideal. But yeah, I don't know. I've got both and I love both. I haven't fully embraced just e-bikes, and that's something else I wondered if the research had touched on, was how many people are still riding both types of bikes, how many people have multiple bikes rather than it just being their sole, they only ride e-bikes now. Because again, within my friendship group of females that ride, and we have a separate little e-bike group, but the majority of the women within Girls Alive are still, I would say 90% are still on analog bikes.
Yeah, I suppose it depends on your different riding groups to a certain extent, doesn't it? Before we move on from you, Zoe, do you want to talk about Chilterns, maybe? E-motocross bikes.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a few problems. I've had interactions with them on a byway, not wearing helmets, faces covered. That group typically riding the Chilterns or the cake bikes or the electric, motorbikes. They're a very different demographic, I think, to what we would know to be EMTB riders. And yeah, we had a slight interaction with them, and they were quite threatening, I suppose. And I was out riding by myself. I was actually on an e-bike, and I was slightly worried that they might try and push me off my e-bike and take my e-bike. Because again, if you're a female solo rider, you're riding a very expensive bike. It can be quite threatening, and we've definitely had a few problems with that in the Surrey Hills, where they're riding where they shouldn't be riding, and they're possibly that rung let down the ladder on compared to the EMTBs. But I think also about educating the general public, because there's been posts on the local Facebook groups about electric bikes, and it's like, no, they're not the same. An electric bike is this, and a Chiltern or an e-motorbike is that. And trying to maybe firm up what those sorts of distinctions are, I think might be helpful for the general public as well.
I think that's the point. I think from everyone's perspective on this call, they're a completely different thing. They're not pedaling; they're doing it even more illegally than we are, even when we're riding, unauthorized trails. But to the general public, I don't think they can tell the difference. They're just all e-bikes.
No, but also
and that's a real problem for us.
It is, but also I get called out all the time on my non-e-bike, and people think it's an e-bike because it's just got a slightly fat down tube. The number of people that have, just on Saturday, some guy went past and was like, "Oh, where have you been today? Have you been over to Homebury?" And I was like, yeah. He was, "Oh, you've got a good range on that." I went, "Yeah, my legs are brilliant range, thanks." Because he thought it was an e-bike, and it's like, and he was a really experienced, and he was on his e-bike. So there can be a lot of assumptions as well, that especially sometimes as a woman, that I might be going quite quick and therefore I must be on an e-bike. May gets it as well because her bike's a Scott with a hidden shock. So people then go, "Oh, that's an e-bike," and it's not an e-bike. So I think what's really difficult is we cannot always tell what's an e-bike and what's not. I mean, the main key thing is that an e-bike will have the little computer thing on it somewhere, and neither my analog and neither does May Scott Ransom have that on. But I've kind of had it from both sides. I've had people be saying that you're cheating if you're on an e-bike and you shouldn't be on it unless you've got a disability or you're old, or you've got to earn it. And we're very much on with the Girls Alive, as like we were saying before, like, it's brilliant. It enables people to get out and about more. and anything that supports people being out in nature. You know, something else that's not really been talked about is the fact that they can be used massively for commuting as well, for getting from A to B. People may well use their eMTB for that as well if it's shorter distance, you know, and that means we're taking cars off the road, and that's going to be a positive as well. So
okay, cool. Lesley, I'll go next, and then you can go. But okay, yeah, to say briefly, I suppose positively for me, and I've been riding e-bikes, I'm just trying to work it out, for about 10 years, right? And I've been riding both analog and e-bikes during that time, and had different riding groups, you know, for different things. But more recently, I have been using my e-bike to be able to keep up with my much fitter younger friends on normal rides. But, you know, for me, the positives are, as well as everything everyone's already said, is it's just allowing people to mountain bike more, you know, and get more out of mountain biking. Do you see what I mean? I mean, you know, my daughter's free, so being able to sort of pop out briefer and still get quite a lot of trails in on a shorter ride is an amazing thing. And also, you know, even just on normal length rides, you know, on an e-bike, you're going to ride more and ride more trails and have more fun, I think. You know, the downsides, people have talked about this already, I suppose, to say something to add to what people have said is, you know, I do think it is attracting new groups of riders to the sport. And, you know, quite often, as I think other people have said, you know, they haven't got that grounding in trail etiquette, having been mountain bikers for 10 to 15 years already. And that produces problems. You know, one particular group is that there seems to be a lot of motocross riders, you know, petrol motocross riders that have switched to e-bikes, and they seem to have a very, you know, a different set of etiquette, but also different sort of what they want to do on their bikes. You know, they're probably the people that someone made the point earlier that want the bikes with the most powerful motors on them, and it's all about, you know, going fast up the hill and all that sort of stuff. So, you know, I think it's causing cultural issues within mountain biking, I think, because of these new entrants to the sport that are bringing either no experience with them about etiquette or a different experience of what normal etiquette is to the sport. Cool. Lesley, over to you.
Great, thank you. I think for me, I think that diversity, I think we're seeing a little bit of movement in terms of people are cycling for longer, but I actually think the e-bike could really smash this if it was done properly. But there's lots of different things that have to come into fruition for that to be able to actually happen. And some of that we've touched on today, and I just think there has to be more conversations. We have to think about wider, just attracting people to the sport and, you know, really making it grow. I think a negative that I've definitely seen and has been reported locally is just some of the manners in which e-bikers tend to ride up trails all together side by side. It can be quite off-putting for people, so feel a little bit more intimidated sometimes in that space. But yeah, I think they have the ability to really grow. Zoe, we did collect some of that data in terms of what bikes people have been using, and you know, have they always ridden an e-bike, or have they have they used non-electric bikes before but now ride an e-bike? It was quite even across it, but in terms of so 26% said they used to ride a non-electric mountain bike but now only ride an e-mountain bike. 22% said they mainly ride an e-bike and occasionally ride a non-electric bike. And then the other big one was that they're just e-mountain bike curious. So they were the three main areas within that. Roddy, we also did collect some data in terms of people understanding outdoor access codes and if they knew where to get help from if they did get into difficulty. And again, we saw quite vast differences in that. And I think, Robin, what you were touching on there, we've got people coming in from all different aspects of the sport, which is great. But what we have to try and figure out as a community now is, how do we make sure at all of those touch points where a rider could come into the sport, they can get all of the information that they need, so that they can remain safe and we can continue to see it grow.
Okay, cool. That was a nice segue into, and we won't spend too long on this. So, and this is, I'm not going to put you all on the spot. So this is hands up if you've got something to add. But, you know, we do, to Leslie's point, you know, like how do we exploit the potential of e-bikes to open up mountain biking to underrepresented groups? You know, what more can we do? I don't know, Lesley, if you've got any initial thoughts to help kick off the conversation with, like what thinking you've done around that already?
I think maybe I'm interested in understanding a little bit more. So I think I need to get into the data a little bit more, but I'm interested in like the trails that we've talked about. We think there might be individuals who are using these bikes that we've not captured that data effectively yet. So I would be really interested to know, you know, what are people looking for in those spaces, and can we actually, you know, help sort of guide people when they come into the sport? Maybe, you know, going to do your more sort of severe downhill enduro trails are not the best thing for you, but here are some nicer entryways into it. I also think in terms of skill development, that I think there is something there in terms of individuals being able to ride features more frequently when they're first learning and not be as tired when they get into those areas can be really beneficial for their skill development and their experience, especially for new populations coming into the sport.
Okay, so you got your hand up.
Yeah, I think it's something we've thought about with Girls Alive. We run and have run enhanced privacy swimming, predominantly aimed at Muslim women who need female-only environments. So they can't use a shared changing room and they can't have any windows and things like that. And we've thought about running mountain bike sessions for them and getting e-bikes, you know, if they're not fit and they're not used to riding bikes. But I sort of have a bit of an issue of getting people into a sport that then is not remotely accessible for them without having continual funding, because, you know, you've got to be able to afford to maintain these bikes. You've got to be able to afford to store them. You know, you've got to be able to have storage space to be able to store these bikes. And so I think we've definitely got a responsibility there with that about, you know, trying to get people into a sport, but then effectively cutting them off it when there's no longer funding. So I think there's definitely like a fine line of, you know, like it's a gateway drug. Do you know what I mean? Like you're getting them into it and then it becomes kind of that expensive. I think what we're lucky to have in the Surrey Hills with the hideout at Hurtwood now, and which was previously the YHA, and the collab with Just Pedal. They now have obviously fleets of bikes in the Surrey Hills, smack bang in the middle of it, and it can make that way more accessible. So they are doing, you know, demo days, or we can do events with them where you can do some coaching with people and you can get them out onto the trails. So I think having that sort of hub, a bit like you've got at Forest of Dean, where you've got a hub where you've got a load of bikes and you can help people get out on them and do some of that coaching, it is really key. But I think you have to think about what the long-term goals are. It's something that we've thought about with Girls Alive. We don't run specific e-bike rides because it's not that, you know, it's not accessible. It's just, oh yes, you can come on a ride, but you need to go and spend $4,000. You know, and especially with the potential changes to the Cycle to Work scheme, you know, making that slightly harder to access. So yeah, I think it can be done, and it can be done really, really well in getting those people out. And certainly, I know they have at the Hurtwood Hideout have had funding for inner city London kids to come out and have mountain bike coaching. And there's what they've got at the Hideout Hostel is obviously the ability to sleep and have food and do a couple of days out. And I think that's really powerful to get people out into the countryside. But yeah, we do have that responsibility of how do we do it in the right way that doesn't end up causing issues, whether that be etiquette and you know, style of riding and all that jazz as well.
Cool, thanks. I think it's the Surrey Hills' fault that we're losing the bike allowance. Right?
Yeah, where we've got no official trails.
People buying e-bikes to ride, 10 grand e-bikes to ride the Surrey Hills. That was
But
exactly
it's
the
the
exact
crazy.
quote in the Financial Times.
I know it was, and we don't have a single current legal trail to ride in the Surrey Hills.
Yeah,
So
no, I
that's
know,
really
totally. Anyway,
interesting.
let's move on to other people's questions. Right, go on, Sam.
To be fair, that whole point was stolen from me already. I was actually going to say the same thing about the cycle to work scheme. It wasn't a positive thing. It was a barrier to accessibility, and it's just a personal point of view. I think it's actually probably going to hit everyone harder in terms of growth and bike shops than what we realise if the speculation on that is going to be real.
And have you got any personal experience? You mentioned that you had quite a few disabled riders that have come into the sport locally to you. I mean, have you got any experiences you can share in terms of what trails they like riding, or what brought them in?
Yeah. So my friend Gary, who's a part of Ox Trails, I mean, he's been a long-term rider, but he had a football injury which caused his leg to be kind of dead from the knee down. But he rides everything that I do, which is kind of your more kind of typical enduro off-piste trails. There's a chap that rides often at Barbary Clumps where we build, and again he has exactly the same skill level as I have, and he's been born with only one hand, so he's got this really nifty kind of adaptive attachment to attach his arm onto his bike. So I think the examples of that was just how incredible people can kind of adapt with these tools, and I'm not sure how often that really is spoken about, to be honest. Every now and again I'll just kind of see it, and I always make a point of going over and speaking to someone to say that's incredible that you've got that. So I'm wondering if there's an opportunity to do some good news stories with some of these more kind of unique adaptations for e-bikes to show people that, you know, they might have a unique condition, but there's probably a way to adapt it for them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really, really good point. Roddy?
Thanks. So thoughts I've got are around renting, and I think it'd be interesting to know more about how ownership and renting compares of bikes. And I suppose, yeah, maybe a bit of an idea is bike share in areas, and I think particularly former mining areas where there are hills, like where I live, and like South Wales and places, there's various places that are former industrial areas where it's just lots of towns and villages, and actually the best way to get around often is via gravel roads, if not mountain biking as we would sort of tend to do it, and maybe there's maybe a place for maybe fat tire rigid e-bikes for sort of bike hire or something like that. Was kind of my kind of general gist of thinking there.
Cool, makes sense. Right, I'm not expecting, if we don't have people that want to talk about this, we'll bring the call to an end. But the couple of other things we talked about, talking about was, how do we try to ensure that the growth of e-bike usage is both socially and environmentally sustainable? Does anyone have any thoughts about that? I mean, obviously we talked earlier about, the potential e-bikes have on trails, but there seems to be some difference of opinion about how much impact e-bikes actually have on trails compared to normal bikes. We've also talked about the sort of socially sustainable aspects in terms of the fact that it makes making mountain biking even more expensive than mountain biking already was, and obviously mountain biking was already pretty expensive and therefore economically exclusive. Does anyone have any thoughts around, either those environmental or social aspects? Right, Kostas and then Ian, but Kostas was marginally before you, Ian.
Yeah, so thanks. I think we're missing a lot of data from to make them more environmentally relevant. So, for example, one thing we really need to do, and I've been looking for it, so if anybody knows to point me out, would be great, do a life cycle analysis of an e-bike, e-mountain bike, because from what I've been looking, you can find for normal mountain bikes, but there's nothing on e-bikes, and that will tell us really the carbon footprint and all those things they're important. Also, there is no data on the specific damage on erosion that e-bikes can do. We have specific tires for e-bikes, but we don't have any data on if they cause more erosion or less. And that's something I've talked with some tire manufacturers, and they haven't been able to provide anything. So I think we need a bit more experimental data there, because that will feed in a lot on perceptions of people, perhaps some misconceptions they have, but unless we have this data, we cannot be sure. So
yeah, there was an IMBA US bit of academic research, well, IMBA US sponsored academic research, but it's about 5 or possibly even 8 or 10 years old. But that, it did say that e-mountain bikes didn't cause any more erosion than normal mountain bikes. But it's not clear, or certainly I don't remember, whether that was just per pass of the trail and whether that factored in that people might be riding that trail more because they were doing more laps because they were on e-bikes. Do you see what I mean? I'm not sure if it took account of that or not. Ian?
Yeah, I mean, all I was going to say is that kind of obviously there's quite a few trail build projects going on in sort of my world at the moment, and Whippendale was basically designed around the fact that more people would be using e-bikes over time. So it's a bit of a downhill ride back up loop that shares a bridleway, and obviously that was kind of fundamental to being able to make that trail work. And again, with the new trails we're designing and building on Aston Hill, they're really pinned on people riding more e-bikes, because if you've ever been to Aston, you know how steep it is to get back up. And so I think we're going to see a real pick up in people changing over to e-bike to do that, or the downhillers looking more at uplift, but the e-bike being the choice of bike. So again, just designing the trails with that in mind. So looking at how we can make the trail a little bit more robust and wear a bit better. And obviously knowing the riding habits of the e-bikers, we can build a bit more with them in mind as well.
Cool. Thanks, Ian. Roddy, you still got your hand up. I think that's just from last time. But Jez, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think from the trail point of view, the sustainability is just mileage. It's not, I honestly don't think they do much more damage. It's just that they do much more miles. So you've got to make the trail a bit more robust for that. Because you're putting more miles into the trail. So you definitely see more, because we notice it more at Dolby, which is an old cross-country trail, so it's 20 miles, and you used to get lots of that hammer about, it's all climbing, it's a slog, it's hard work. You don't get anything like that anymore because so many people are on e-bikes. Well, the people who used to complain are on an e-bike, so they find it easier. But in terms of sustainability for me, the main thing is actually the bike itself, because I don't think they're fit for purpose yet or sustainable. I've got a TQ motor, the thing, and it's coming up for 2 years old. So you're thinking, well, I'll just contact TQ and see what the service interval is and what you need to do. And they came back to me and said, you don't have to do anything. You just have to upgrade the software twice a year that we put out. Well, to me, that's built-in obsolescence. That it's ride to destruction. So, and I can't find anybody. They don't have an official, as far as I'm aware, as yet, they don't have an official repairer in the UK. So, how can the bikes be sustainable? It's only because I can maintain my own bike that, I'm very, very carefully trying to keep the motor in good order. I rinse it very carefully, but the manufacturers don't seem to be doing anything in that area to maintain the longevity of the bike itself, so it will have a shelf life, unlike most other bikes that you can keep maintaining.
Yeah, I remember. I've almost wanted my motor to die on several occasions just before the warranty was out. What you want to do is get a new motor just before your warranty disappears.
That was one of my things as well, thinking,
yeah.
yeah.
And then in some cases you get a new warranty on that new motor, so you just sort of keep going. But there are a few sort of outfits that have sprung up to sort of I mean they're doing it properly, but they're not covered by the manufacturer. But there are people repairing e-bike motors that know them inside out. Whether the TQ's a big enough part of the market for them to be able to do TQ motors is a different question. But there are. But there's not many of them. They're not that well known. So whether an e-biker whose bike breaks because their motor's gone knows that they can go and get it fixed at one of these places. And there's also the problem of getting your motor to this place, which is probably not local to you. So you've got to take the motor out and ship it to them, or ship the whole bike to them. So yeah, it's a massive problem. Ronnie, have you still got your hand up, or is that just from before?
Yeah, no, I did. I was going to come back. I think it's a good point on the serviceability. I think Bosch are more maybe better than some on have sort of service centers and stuff. I was going to talk about accessibility and making it more possible to have to use an electric mountain bike as transport as well, and that makes it more affordable if that can be a car replacement or a second car replacement for a household or whatever. And yeah, I think probably picking particularly on storage or parking, and yeah, just places taking bikes not getting stolen seriously, having like CCTV signs up, even if it is covered by CCTV, having a sign that says so, I think is really good. Having I think a big one as well is unlike other types of e-bikes on EMTB, you don't want to be carrying a heavy lock with you. So having some way to have, like, I don't know, a lock that you can have access to or whatever. And I'm not sure if I'll get in trouble for mentioning brands or whatever, but something I love is the Ortlieb Steady Rack. Not Steady Rack, Quick Rack, I beg your pardon, which is just awesome. It's like takes like 2 seconds to just click in and you've got a pannier rack, which is great for commuting, and then just pop it off and go and ride trails. So
yeah, well, just on your I don't know if you saw in the news, it might not have. I don't know if British Transport Police go north of the border, but anyway, there was Cycling UK did this expose on British Transport Police saying they basically, even if they've got CCTV footage, they won't investigate bike theft from train stations.
No,
they won't even look at the CCTV footage.
Yeah, no,
which
crazy.
Is ridiculous.
It's like decriminalising bike theft. It's crazy. Yeah.
Zoe.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we talk about like building trails and stuff. One thing I've certainly noticed locally is the people that are building some of the trails are e-bike riders, and therefore they're not making sure that you can hit that jump if you're on an analog bike at trail speed. Because I'm well aware that if you're coming up to a jump, and you're on an e-bike, you can just stick in a couple of extra cranks and you've got the speed. So I think that's a real consideration. Like Ian was talking about, building at Aston Hill predominantly for those sorts of e-bikes, that those people sort of that are building that maybe ride e-bikes themselves are not thinking about that trail being accessible for everybody, because that's definitely something that we're getting here. All the trail builders in the Surrey Hills pretty much exclusively ride e-bikes, and you're getting to the point where you've got trails now that are becoming e-bike trails only. Either they're super steep or they've got silly features on that you just know is going to be really difficult for the majority of people, unless you're exceptionally skilled, to hit some of those jumps. And I think that's something to just bear in mind, really, about trail building, and to just those people building need to be aware of all of the trail users, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and just for everyone else's benefit, the Surrey Hills, as Zoe already said, there are no official trails, so they're all unsanctioned trails built illegally, let's face it. And there are a lot of gap jumps, unlike other areas of the country, because it's not Forestry England's land. The landowners historically have been more tolerant of those sorts of features, so there are a lot of them, much more than you would experience in other areas of the UK. But it does mean, as I pointed out, that those gaps now are getting way too big for you to clear on an analog bike. Which may be causing more accidents. To Tony, and then I think we'll probably have to join the call to an end. We're losing people because it's we've run way past the 9:30. But go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, it's just a quick one. I think Havoc Bike Park have two tariffs, don't they? They have an e-bike tariff and a bike tariff.
Yeah, and Bike Park Wales do as well.
Do they?
Yeah. You pay more for a pedal up pass on an e-bike than you do on an analog bike. Yeah, because they figure you're going to use the trails more and therefore put more damage in. It's not. I can't remember the price differential, but it's quite significant.
I think it's 12 quid or 20 quid at Havoc.
Yeah, it's probably similar difference.
They reckon you're going to get twice as many laps in, so they charge you double.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think Bike Park Wales is like £24 for their pedal up pass on the e-bike, and it's 16 on a analog.
Yeah, but another to Zoe's point about people building different sorts of trails. What I've noticed in South Wales is that people are building similar trails that they did before, but on hills that you can only really access on an e-bike. I.e., before, historically trails would have been accessible by quite mild fire roads that you could ride up on an analog bike, no problem. Whereas now, trails are appearing on hills where, the climb is like that and you can only ride up it on an e-bike, or you've got a very long, hard slog on an analog bike as a push-up. You couldn't possibly ride up that gradient on an analog bike. That's the difference. Yeah. Cool. Has anyone got any final points? Okay, well, let's leave it there. Before I say thank you to Lesley, which I'll do in a minute, just to point out, Kostas is on another call, presenting on another call at 6 p.m. this Thursday. The details are in the newsletter, the November newsletter I sent out. It is the Cultures of Mountain Biking Zoom seminar, which is an academically focused mountain biking seminar, global one. But he's going to look at how technology, trail access, and cycling culture shape attitude towards e-mountain bikes. The details of how to sign up for that are in the newsletter. And thank you very much, Lesley. That was really good. And thank you, everyone, for participating in the conversation. Hopefully, we've all got something quite useful about it. I've obviously recorded this on Zoom. So, Lesley, obviously, you've got all of that qualitative data to pour through at your leisure at some point in the future. But yeah, thank you so much, Lesley. It was brilliant. And thanks very much, guys. Have a good evening. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.